I have an acquaintance that I knew way back in the 70s. I last saw him about 12 years ago at the funeral of a mutual friend's mother. I have always regarded him with a great deal of respect. I ate over pizza one night in the mid-70s with a good friend of mine. He related an incident that happened back when he was in junior high school, or possibly high school in the 60s. He was staying over at a friend's house one weekend out in the country. The area was about equidistant from a fairly large metropolitan area and a smaller town. The area has a lot of small farms and not that many trees. Most property and roads are laid out in a rectangular east-west north-south grid. The two boys were about to turn in for the night when they heard something out back in a field. He described the sound as being like that of a vacuum cleaner. He and his friend went out in back of the house. There was a fence a little ways from the house with a row of trees along the fence line, partially obscuring the view of the pasture beyond. I've forgotten how close they got, but I believe they went at least to the fence line, where they were able to obtain a good view of what was making the sound. Beyond the fence was a tank. In this instance, the tank was a circular dugout pond, possibly with a shallow earthen dam on one side to hold in the water. These are used for watering livestock. Almost all farms have these, and my grandpa's farm had a large one we used to fish in. What was making the sound was positioned above the pond. I do not recall him mentioning any lights, so the object was probably mostly dark, but probably had some kind of lights. What looked like a pipe was angled down from the bottom of the craft and in contact with the surface of the water. This appeared to be where the sucking sound was coming from, so it certainly appeared like the craft was sucking water up from the tank. Aside from the sucking sound, I don't recall him saying he heard any other sound. He said the object was cigar-shaped. A disc-shaped craft seen from the side possibly could have appeared cigar-shaped, though these usually look more like a saucer with an inverted saucer on top. Helicopters certainly aren't this shape, and airplanes cannot hover. About 10 or 20 years later, I read that vacuum cleaner sounds are often heard emanating from UFOs that are hovering close over water. Neither of us knew this information about the sound at the time when he related the incident to me, but it served to further cement in my mind the truth and reality of his sight. Once, when I was 18, an eternity ago in 1980, I came home from work and went out back to sit on the patio with my mom. I lived in Salt Lake City, Utah. The valley is around 15-20 miles across and surrounded by mountains on almost all sides. It was the middle of the summer and around 7:30 to 8:00 p.m. in the evening, so visibility was still very good. As I checked in with my mother and we talked about the day's events, we noticed a dark triangular-shaped object right in front of the mountains, very near our house. I lived around 3 miles away from a particular mountain. It was in fact right in front of the most notable mountain around our valley. If you Google a picture of Salt Lake City, you'll most likely see a picture of a flat slab-faced granite mountain called MT, Olympus in the background. That's the one I'm talking about, and we lived just a little north of it, but also up against the mountain range. I took a good look at the craft and was able to discern that it was triangular. It was a little too far away to tell if it was making any noise at all. But that soon changed. While we were both looking at it and pointing toward it, it very suddenly and quickly shot towards us from a complete standstill to directly overhead, and also to a full standstill in less than a second. It covered 3 miles from hovering in front of MT, Olympus, to hovering almost directly 500 feet overhead in under a second, almost as if it had taken note of the fact that we had noticed it. I could only assume that either there were no humans or other life forms aboard, or that the craft was equipped with inertial dampeners, which, we as a species have not yet created. That was some pretty fancy flying in my book, given that inertia would have killed, or at least injured, whoever was inside of it. The strange thing was that once it was overhead, it still made no noise at all. At this range, I could easily see details on the ship which were very few. It was a definite equilateral triangle with a single light at the corner. Some vague lines running from corner to corner. It was black and completely silent. I turned to my mom to make sure that I wasn't hallucinating, but she was looking up dumbfounded with her mouth open in amazement as well. She, of course, saw the same thing. We stood there in silence, not wanting to believe what we were seeing, and thinking if we did anything, it might chase away the object. We were unable to deny what we were seeing. It hovered for about 20-30 seconds, and then suddenly streaked across the sky at an incredible velocity in the direction of downtown Salt Lake City, and the state capitol building, where it again came to a very sudden stop. It again paused for a few seconds, maybe half a minute, and then disappeared over the horizon in a northwestern direction, roughly toward the largest Air Force base in the state of Utah called Hill Air Force Base. The last place I saw it going was right over the Great Salt Lake. In less than 3-4 seconds, it had completely vanished, all without making a sound or having any flight control qualities. We talked about what we had just witnessed and concluded that it probably wasn't a government craft due to the secrecy with which the government develops its aircraft. We lived somewhat near 30-50 miles to the Air Force Base, and there was a huge desert government-controlled base to the west of us over which they could test their vehicles in secrecy had they wanted to. It's interesting to note that Dugway was the place where the U.S. Air Force practiced and prepared for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There's also the fact that over 40 years later, there's still no such craft known to be in the U.S. Air Force's or any other government's arsenal of ships. If they had been testing it back in 1980, it should be commonly known about by now. It's said that nothing is more fleeting than government secret. I don't know for sure that there were aliens aboard that ship, but it seems to be one of the more likely explanation out of only a handful of options. I'll say again that had the United States Air Force wished to test a secret aerial vehicle, there was a gigantic military base just west of the Salt Lake Valley. I do mean huge. In fact, I don't think there's a larger military base on U.S. soil. If you're curious, just type in Dugway Proving Ground in Google Earth and you'll see it's bigger than some states. On October 1st, 2006, I was on duty as a New Mexico State Corrections Officer. I was posted in a vehicle on the perimeter fence line of RCC Roswell Correctional Center State Prison, located 25 miles south of the town of Roswell, New Mexico. At 11:15 p.m., I was parked behind the prison chapel. A loud popping sound and an electrical crackling occurred in the sky. White, rectangular-shaped lights appeared in the sky. They were following one after another and were moving from my right to my left. Then, the lights began rotating in a circular pattern, coming towards me, this time from my left towards my right, as the lights slowly passed in front of me for a second time. A large saucer-shaped craft came into view. The ship was a dull gray in color. The rectangular-shaped white lights were windows located on the side of the craft. I estimated the saucer to be 650 feet across. After the initial popping sound and the electrical crackling, when the lights first appeared, the ship was now completely silent. It was moving very smoothly and quietly. It was on a slow glide path, moving towards the town of Roswell, New Mexico. I could see the lights of Roswell on the horizon, Some 25 miles away, as the craft passed by me, it cloaked. Not all at once, but in two motions. All that remained visible was the white light shining from the interior of the ship, out of those windows. The lights first went to half intensity and then went out completely. At that point, the saucer became completely invisible. I sat there for a couple of minutes in the dark, waiting in case something else occurred. I didn't want to miss it. Nothing else occurred. I drove from that location over to a well-lit area next to our master control center. I grabbed a blank log sheet and wrote down everything that I could remember while it was still fresh in my mind. I only told my wife and one close friend about my UFO encounter. After 5 years, I did an interview with Linda Moulton Howe. She wrote it up in an article entitled Haunted Roswell, which appeared on her website, reported and edited by Linda Moulton Howe, dated December 23, 2011.